Well, the weather outside is weather, and it's very, very cold in Canada, but things are heating up down south ahead of the MLB Winter Meetings. We are joined by Shi Davidi for some instant analysis presented by Tylenol Rapid Release Gel Caps. Rapid release for rapid relief. Okay, Shi. So, yes, like I said, the Winter Meetings next week, you're going to be heading down there. My first question surrounds the free agency and lack thereof movements for the Toronto Blue Jays. Still no major signings. Do you expect that to change at the Winter Meetings next week?
Well, it's worth pointing out that the signings across the baseball industry have been relatively quiet. There certainly has been some action. Obviously, the Houston Astros signing Jose Abreu this week was a big move. Maybe that kicks things off, but it feels like there's a lot of momentum building towards things actually happening in San Diego next week. I think that's a good thing. General Manager Ross Atkins of the Blue Jays said, he feels like it could be a pretty active week next week, industry wide. Whether that includes the Blue Jays or not, I think that's still to be determined. I do think they'll probably get a couple things done there. It feels like, again, like a lot of momentum is building towards that, but teams love deadlines, and there isn't that sort of pressure that there this season like there was last year when they felt like they had to get stuff done either before the lockout started or just coming out of the lockout. There's a bit more time for things to play out. And I think that's part of what we're seeing happening right now, not just for the Blue Jays, but industry wide.
So the hot stove remains lukewarm as I put my hands over it. We're just kind of waiting for it to heat up a little bit. But we're just going to stick with the Toronto Blue Jays because we covered the signings portion. Now, how about the trading portion, specifically looking at the catching position with the Jays? Are we waiting for Wilson Contreras to sign before we kind of see anything else happen with the Jays and catching wise?
Well, that's a really interesting market, and one that I think for the Blue Jays, in some ways, could be a bit of a domino piece for their offseason, because we do know that the Blue Jays have a surplus at catcher. We do know that there is significant interest in their catchers, and they can use that asset or those assets as a way to accomplish a good deal of what they're trying to accomplish this offseason. We know that they're looking to add a starting pitcher, at least one, probably two. They're looking to add in their outfield as well, ideally a left-handed hitter, someone who could perhaps also play center field. And they have different roads that they can go down. So there's certainly one scenario where, they accomplish or fill one of those needs by trading one of their catchers and then fill the other part of that in free agency. But there's also a scenario where the Blue Jays just decide, hey, we can do everything we need to do in free agency, and we'll just keep this catching depth for us and use it over the course of next season. So all these things are percolating right now. And the sense that I have is that if the Blue Jays felt there was a definitive way forward, one way or the other, that was so much better than the other options, we would have seen that execute or be executed at this point. But right now, it seems that all these paths are open, and maybe something has to happen, whether it's a team moving, the price on a player coming down, or other pieces in the market falling into place that prompts them to execute their plan.
So the Blue Jays, in order to actually play the games, they'll need someone to manage their players. John Schneider back for another season, and he'll have some help, as announced this week. Don Mattingly and his sideburns coming along. He will be in the dugout for the Blue Jays this coming season. So a question that I have, and that I think a lot of Jays fans were thinking, that if things go sideways, real sideways, and things go real south for the Toronto Blue Jays to start the year, is Don Mattingly that break glass in case of emergency type manager down there?
It's interesting because I actually looked at it from a bit of a different vantage point. I think the fact that you have John Schneider bringing in the very experienced, very capable, very accomplished Don Mattingly in as his bench coach is a sign of how secure he is in his position. Because the last thing you want to do with a manager that you just gave a 3-year contract to, as the Blue Jays just did with John Schneider, is bring in someone to work alongside him who's going to undermine him or at least raise questions that, hey, this might be your replacement in waiting. I think the fact that John Schneider signed off on this, he was the one who led the the bench coach process after the Blue Jays pared down their initial list of 45 candidates, is a real sign of how confident he is in his position with the team, how strongly the front office feels about him in that role, and that he saw the addition of Don Mattingly as a way to bring in a really experienced, not only manager, but former player, a guy who's a six-time All-Star, a former MVP, one of the best defensive first basemen in recent memory, if not ever, to bring in and be an asset and a resource for his players and for the rest of the coaching staff to draw on. So I can understand why people are automatically thinking, yeah, this might be a potential replacement in the future if so needed. But I see it more as a sign of just how confident the Blue Jays are in John Schneider, that they don't feel bringing in Don Mattingly would be something that would cause him to be looking over his shoulder.
These are just a few of the topics that everyone will be talking about moving forward at the MLB Winter Meetings next week in San Diego. Shi, you'll be covering it all. Thank you, man. We appreciate it.
The pleasure as always.